let's continue now with our next fireside. We are joined by Jean-Marie Coant, Senior Sustainability Expert at Amfori, and our topic is climate conscious and sustainable supply chains, challenges and solutions. A warm welcome for Jean-Marie, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I actually think we got a little whoop at the back as well, which I quite enjoyed, so welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on this today. And where I'd like to start with a few of the basics. I'm sure lots of people have heard of you and what you do, but maybe not the full picture. Because I know when I was doing my reading, I thought I knew what you did and found out a whole lot more. Go through the role of the business associations in sustainable trade and a bit more about what you do.
Yeah, okay. So I work for Amfori. So we are a global business association based in Brussels with members all over the world. So a lot of members are in the EU, in Germany, the Netherlands, France, and a few other countries. Some are in the UK as well, and we also have members across the globe. We were founded in 1977, at the time under the FTA name, Foreign Trade Association, and then we became Amfori in 2018 with really sustainability and sustainable supply chain at the heart of the activity and identity, and that was the change we made. So what we do is we provide our members with a full series of services and products for corporate sustainability due diligence, really helping them mapping their supply chain, identifying where there could be adverse impacts along the supply chain, adverse impacts for human rights and environment, and then mitigating these adverse impacts. So compared to also other names that were mentioned before in the panels, we are not a climate service. We are not even a data collection service. We do this due diligence activities, and then because that means having close connections with factories to do social audits, to do environmental audits, to do self-assessments, all this, capacity building and so on, then it positions us in a space where we can also collect a lot of useful information for climate and also act on reducing the supply chain emissions.
It's a particularly fascinating space, as you say, and there are so many, as I'm sure you'll agree, touch points there about how you interact with the members and businesses. But let's talk about compliance here and how big a driver regulations are and making sure businesses are compliant. How do you fit into that space?
Well, compliance is still very much a big driver. I mean, it's a driver for companies who want to comply, I mean, it's an obvious thing, but want to know which rules they have to follow. But it's also a driver for the front runners, because, I mean, if you want to run ahead of the others, you need also to understand what are the big directions that are taken globally. So this is really key to have a very clear set of rules and directions on where the world is going, or the directions or where the regulations are going. Because we have a lot of members in the EU, of course, we follow a lot of European regulations. Of course, we follow the omnibus changes and uncertainties very closely. But well, two things. First, about also the business associations, something I would like to say is that we have a lot of big companies in our membership, retailers, brands, but we also have a lot of SMEs. And then for all of them, even big companies, I would say, but even more for smaller companies, they have to work collaboratively. I mean, there's no other way forward. They don't have the leverage to also just contact each one of their suppliers and say, well, I need this, please do this, I would like to have this information. This is something that can only have leverage if they unite through some sort of group, and then we are materializing this group and also providing the services that do this. And then the regulation, this is also the question we receive most. Well, is the data that we will be collecting through Amfori BSCI, Amfori BEPI, our social or environmental main products, comply with CSRD as the most obvious question? And so this is also how we shape our tools, right? We really make sure that this is online with what the regulations are asking, and by chance, regulations usually follow pre-existing standards like OECD for due diligence or the greenhouse gas protocol for climate accounting. So this is, I mean, something also that has stability, which is good. But yeah, again, really being captured and clarified through regulations.
You do mention the current climate and the current uncertainty that there is at the moment. It's, I'm sure you'll all agree, quite extraordinary, the current scenario that we see ourselves in. With so much uncertainty, few Do you ever worry it could slow the progress and the momentum we've seen in recent years?
I mean, there is a risk that it does so. Yeah, that's. I mean, we need to be clear about this. But really, there are a few things we need to keep in mind. First, even if we have uncertainty, CSRD or CSRD, they are enforced. I mean, there is this package, there is these changes on the way, but they need to follow the legal process. These rules exist, right? And our advice as a member association is really to tell our members, proceed with what you started doing. You did so much work on collecting information, organizing your data, organizing your due diligence, and this is even like as a first thing what we are helping them with. So don't lose this. I mean, just do this, and a company following OECD will always be safe, because this is also like the general framework for due diligence that drives regulation. So CSRD might be a lighter version of this, perhaps, but still within this global picture, I would say. So, I mean, all these things exist. Let's continue using them.
That is fascinating advice, because a quote that was always given to me that sticks with me is about compliance, and about being compliant isn't enough. If you're compliant, it probably means you're a little bit behind. There's a lot of work you should be doing to be ahead of it. Does that fit in with that for you, the fact that so much work's already happened, everything's up in the air with the omnibus, people should really push on and make sure they're ahead of what may happen? That's the most vague question I think I've ever asked, but do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and also, I mean, regarding climate, for example, we have science-based targets that were mentioned many times this morning. The Paris Agreement is still there. I mean, maybe a bit fragilized by the US leading it, but still, I mean, most of the countries in the world still are working towards it. The climate neutrality targets for 2050, I heard Amazon Freight 2040, even for some companies, all this is still there. So this is also just continuing this work, because, yeah, again, it's really heavy, difficult to get the data, to understand what to do to decarbonize, to start implementing these measures. So if we break the dynamics now, I mean, it's going to be very long to build it back. So it's really, yeah, this continuity as a key element.
I'm fascinated to get more insight into the advice you are working with your members, say about Scope 3 and how important it is to have the right tools to give you real visibility. What kind of advice and guidance do you give your members there?
Well, regarding Scope 3 emissions, so we launched a new version of our environmental tool, the Amfori BPI product 2 years ago, and we really tried to improve the easiness of collecting data from factories. We are doing this through, maybe I also need to precise this, we are collecting data either through self-assessments, by having risk assessments, we call them, directly filled in by factories, or we send auditors on the field, or in factories. And when it's self-assessments, it needs to be easy to understand, accessible by factory people. I mean, some of them are big factories, they are really even engineer specialists, but other ones are not. So you need to have something that, maybe that's obvious, but is also language-wise understandable by them, but also giving them a lot of online advice, like really having something which is clear, and that limits the mistakes, because we saw before there were many mistakes in units, in declaring energy data, so we also try to make it easier for them. And so the tool is really key. I mean, all of the things we discussed regarding carbon or energy and climate data go through platform, IT tools. This is an obvious thing. But then capacity building, training is also super key, because, I mean, if you don't really understand what is expected from you as a factory, if you don't understand how the platform works, then you're lost, and the data quality will be very disappointing. So all this is really one big thing. So the tool, plus all the things making that the tool is used well. I mean, it was also, I think, mentioned that this morning that sometimes really you have rocket science platforms that are used just like an Excel. This is really not what we want.
And one thing I find fascinating when having someone join us from an organisation such as yourself, you'll have contact with so many different partners, organisations, and get so much information from the coalface, if you will. So I'm going to continue to mine that coalface. Let's leave that analogy there. It's not really appropriate for a sustainability event. What do you hear about the challenges that partners are facing when it comes to measuring Scope 3? What do you hear from them at the moment?
Well, you mentioned the great variety of stakeholders we have, like factories. If we take factories, we really have a very, very different level of maturity from one to another. So this is one thing. We have one set of tools, one set of products, and it needs to talk to everyone. It also needs to be aligned with the most advanced members, already like reporting for many years and really wanting to go much deeper. And we also have members who just start the process. So it also needs to work for both. And of course, the main challenge is, where do we set the balance between being super accurate, super granular, entering all the details of what a factory is doing, which, by the way, if this is a self-reported information, may not be reported well, because if it's super long, after some time, I think that the person will be just a bit fed up. So we want to be comprehensive enough, but not too comprehensive. It needs to be also user-friendly for users. It needs to be, manageable, practical and manageable. And in terms of medium-term challenges, I listed just a few challenges we are working on at the moment. The supply chain mapping is really difficult. At the moment, most of the sites that are mapped by our members on our platform are manufacturing tier 1, so the ones really providing the finished goods. The ones above, some of them are mapped, but not so many, and we know a lot of adverse impacts happen in tier 2, tier 3, and upper tiers. So we also want them to map more and more of these upper tiers. So we have new functionalities to help them do this, but this is a long way. I mean, we also sometimes hear members saying we don't really have a visibility on who are the suppliers of our suppliers. So how do we just build this? Things like also incorporating product features like raw materials, the packaging supplies, some aspects like this that we are lacking at the moment is also something we look into, but this is difficult. And some of the main crucial questions we have is how do you get good enough data without sending an auditor every year on every site, because this is burdensome, this is expensive, this is probably not scalable even. So there's this balance of how do I ask something to sites, how do I make also desktop verifications, for example, when I don't want to send someone on site, and still, because this is all due diligence and therefore risk-based, where do I identify there is a greater need to send someone face-to-face to really dig into the data and understand the reality of the site. And all this is really not an easy answer. This is, again, the beauty of this risk-based approach with severity and likelihood. And also something which is maybe also more for us, the cost of data. We use a lot of emission factors, turning, for example, energy use into tons of CO2. But then this is expensive, and we buy good emission factors, I think. So this is also expensive data. And when you expand to raw materials, to many other sets of data, it needs to be scalable. We don't want every member, every time there is, or every assessment to cost hundreds of euros of calculation every time. And I mean, in the end, it could also be this. So again, the limitation or the balance to find is not an easy one.
I still want to talk about long-term thinking and maybe tech if we have time, but time is rapidly running out. I'll go to the room for any questions immediately if there's anything that anyone wishes to ask. That was a definite head scratch over to my right. I thought it was a hand going up. I'll continue then. About long-term thinking, because as we were saying, being compliant isn't enough. How critical is long-term thinking when approaching these sort of challenges? And what advice would you have to aid that long-term thinking to make sure it's effective?
Well, this is, of course, key. I mean, I think everybody will agree with this. And just again to talk on climate, with the Paris Agreement, with this 2050 climate neutrality thing, this is long-term. I mean, also with this medium-term target of 2030, this is really giving visibility. And I think at the moment, really, and I kind of understood it was the same for some speakers or some participants today, this is still the moment where a lot of understanding of the situation is done. So collecting data, increasing the quality of data to really understand what are the different sources of emissions, what is the percentage of renewable energy used in these different sites, all these type of things. And then from there, really cutting emissions by having actionable solutions to provide. So we are at this moment where we understand more and more, and then we start also like using the levers to decrease emissions. And all this, coming back to long term, is where do I want to go long term? Where do many of our members, they also have science-based targets. So even though CSRD may not be as stringent in terms of climate transition plan, this is still a commitment they took as a company, and then I really think and hope they will keep it. So this is again having this longer term view, and even 2050, I mean, if they arrive if they arrive at climate neutrality, then it's not the end of the road. They also need to continue having their business kept successful while keeping these emissions extremely low. So it's going to be difficult even after this.
And one final question, if I may, before we release everyone to grab some lunch, would be some advice on tech, about how tech can help with transparency and sustainable procurement. What advice do you tend to give on there when it comes to using the right tech tools and getting the best from it?
So I think on this, really, the right tech tools, because we also provide platforms with our services. I mean, our advice is, of course, to use our platforms when it comes to advising our members, quite naturally, but also to find the right balance between like hard IT contacts. I don't know if you have contacts with IT, but I mean hard connection with IT, having online capacity building, asking for data online, retrieving data online, and also really not forgetting the human aspect, because auditors, again, still create a bond, or at least really they can have live discussions with real people on the situation in the factory. And something which is also really key is that technology indeed is absolutely necessary, but there is a need, for example, for requesters of data to be very clear on what they ask. So not over-requesting data, having really a clear scope of this is why I ask you as a supplier, and this is why I want to ask you this is how I will make use of this data, and I don't ask you something else. And then on the other side of the fence, the suppliers, they also need to be, to trust the system that takes their data. I mean, some of them, they might be a bit reluctant to share this because it's also business sensitive information, but then if they do so, and we hope they do so, it needs to be clear that the data are well managed. It's not just sending as a bottle in the ocean. It's really something which is well kept, well organized, and that on both sides really there is this trust, which is again enabled by IT and tech.
Okay, well we've covered a huge amount over the last 25 minutes or so. Really, really appreciate your advice, your insight. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you very much.